is George Knapp. I dig into news stories that others can't or won't.
I'm Jeremy Corbell, and for some reason, people tell me things they probably shouldn't. And this is Weaponized. George, good to see you.
And you, Jeremy?
This is unexpected.
Well, you know, we've been asked to do a lot of podcasts over the years as guests. We've been asked to host them as well. And finally, we decided the time is right and go ahead and do it. And it's called Weaponized.
Why did you come up with that name?
Why did you come up with that
Come
name?
on, man. It's a horrible name.
I mean, you have used that term before, and it works. I mean, it's a good grabby word, right?
Yeah. I mean, everybody hates it when I say it, but it was born from, I said in some interview, my curiosity has been weaponized, and that just stuck with me. People were haunting me with it, so I embraced it. But I think the point for you and me both is there are things that just keep us up at night, things that we can't put down, like for 35 years studying UFOs, 40 years, whatever you've been doing. So for me, the title Weaponized is that there are these things that we can't put down that keep us up at night. And on this show, we're going to cover all the things that do that to us, that excite us. That was my thinking.
Yeah, and you know, we are identified on purpose with the UFO subject, and we certainly are going to be talking about UFOs and all of its various ramifications, but that's not all that we're going to cover in this program.
Right. And I want to start there a little bit for people that don't know you. You know, I mean, the big question, like, who is George Knapp? How do we find him, sitting here in the seat? So I know George Knapp as investigative reporter out of Las Vegas, Nevada. I mean, that was my introduction to looking for you. It was through UFOs, trying to find you. So can you give us a few, kind of key points for people that don't know you?
I am based in Las Vegas. I started in 1981 at KLAS TV as a general assignment reporter. I then became an anchor, commentator. In the mid-90s, the station created the I-Team, the investigative unit, and since 1995, I've been the chief investigative reporter. And in those years, Las Vegas is the best news town in America, and I've covered everything. I've covered the mob, organized crime, the exorcism of all the mobsters, political scandals, corruption, government officials, celebrities, murders, bikers, fires, every kind of story you can imagine in this great news town. But since 1987, I've been known as the UFO reporter. And, it comes with the territory. It's my own fault for that. No matter what other story I've done and what other awards I've won, and I've won a lot of them, national awards, Peabody's, DuPont, Edward R. Murrow, 28 regional Emmys, a bunch of other stuff. But no matter what story I do, no matter how big it is, I'm the UFO guy. And it's my own fault. Because in 1987, a guy named John Lear walked into the TV station. And he had a stack of documents, turned out to be UFO documents, and he dropped them on the desk of my managing editor, my good buddy, my running partner, Ned Day, who was the principal muckraker investigative reporter of his era. Ned worked with my news director at the time, Robert Stoddall, the most important newsman in probably the modern history of journalism in Nevada. Those guys had a long-standing interest in a place called Area 51. And they had tried to get me interested in it as well. In the mid-1980s, the U.S. Air Force illegally seized 89,000 acres of land around Area 51. One day it's public land, and anybody can drive up there. The next day, you run into armed guards, it's off limits. Only months later, did they ask for permission. So we all had an idea something really interesting was going on in the desert out there. And Lear had helped Bob and Ned break a really big story.
I do not understand why. I cannot get that clicking off of here.
But Lear had given information to Ned and Bob. They broke the story before any of the national news organizations did. So Lear had a certain credibility with those guys. His father, of course, Bill Lear, had developed the 8-track tape and the Lear jet. John had run for public office. He had flown for the CIA. He was a really interesting guy. Comes to the station with a stack of documents, tells Ned, this is an even bigger story than the stealth fighter, Ned. This is going to make your career. It's about the UFO cover-up, biggest story in history. Here's the documentation to prove it. Ned paws through the documents, takes a look at a couple of the pages, and then pushes it back at Lear and says, look, I'm not touching this. If this was true, I'd already know about it. Kind of cocky, like Ned was in those days. So Lear kind of dejectedly grabs up his pile. He's walking out of the newsroom. I had been eavesdropping, which I tend to do. And I said, hey, let me take a look at that. So he left the pile with me. I read through it. These are documents obtained through FOIA. You know, prior to the existence of FOIA, created in the 1970s, if you asked the FBI or CIA or Pentagon, "Hey, have you got any documents about UFOs?" They'd say, "No, and we're not going to give them to you," and they deny it. After FOIA becomes the law of the land, thousands of pages of documentation were forced out of the government and into the hands of UFO investigators and researchers. So that's the primary composition of that pile. I thought, well, this is really interesting because, you know, we all have the same kind of level of interest in UFOs. I wonder if that's true, but never really dug into it.
Right, but you were not a UFO guy before that. You hadn't spent a lot of time when you were young thinking about this. You're just at this point a news reporter, and a new news reporter, and you're just eavesdropping on your boss, and you hear this and it excites you.
So there had been some stories in my family that I'll tell someday, but just not today. So I had an interest in it, but I had no UFO books. I think I might have only one that had been given to me as a present. Had not done any research. But I started looking at these. I thought, this is really interesting because the story at the time, as told by our government, is there's nothing to it. We've investigated it. It's all been explained. Project Blue Book. Go on your way. Don't worry about this at all. These documents showed that was a much different picture behind the scenes, that, in fact, military officials were very concerned about this. They recognized it's a legitimate issue, that these are not ours, they're not Russians, they're from somewhere else, they might be extraterrestrial. I thought, great, maybe I'll just dig into this. And at the time, I produced a program called On the Record, a half-hour public affairs show. Typically, I would interview a county commissioner or a city commissioner, something like that. It aired at 6 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday or Sunday, very limited audience. I thought, what the heck, I'll put Lear on the show, see what he does. And I put him on and just wound him up and let him go. And holy cow, I was blown away.
I mean, that's a pretty famous clip now. You got it out of nowhere. You got this guy coming at you, telling you all this shit about UFOs. And I just remember looking at your face in these original interviews, and it was almost like disdain. You're like, you couldn't believe what he was saying. You were almost like angry about some of what he said because it was so outrageous. But apparently you changed your attitude later on. So what happened after that interview with Lear?
He unleashes this barrage, this incredibly elaborate conspiracy theory, the Lear white paper that is now known in UFO circles about we've got a secret treaty with aliens and we allow them to abduct people and in exchange for technology and all kinds of cover-up stuff and assassinations. And I was blown away. I thought, wow, did I make a mistake in doing this? But he gets off the show. Thanks, John. That was really interesting. And my phone starts ringing, and people start inquiring, what was that about? Who was that guy? Is this real? And it kept ringing. And I realized, at the time, well, this is of interest to the public here. Mm-hmm. So I had him on again. I started reading a little bit more about it. Went up to see Lear. He gave me a bunch of more documents from his files. And I had him on again some months later.
So you realized the public was interested in this. You had never had a response like that.
I had no idea. And then the second time I had him on, the response was even bigger. That's when it really set in that this topic touches the pulse of the public in a way that I did not understand before or appreciate. Had him on a third time with a guy named Bill Cooper, and we'll talk about that at some point on Weaponized.
Why did it grasp the public imagination at that time, do you think, so severely that Lear was saying all this stuff about UFOs? Why do you think the public was going crazy for it?
I didn't understand it at the time. I understand it a lot more now, is that this is a fundamental question of whether we are alone in the universe. And the public really is also motivated by the idea that they've been lied to. I know that is what motivated me in the beginning. The idea that these documents show that the government and the military in particular have a much different opinion about UFOs behind the scenes than the one that they've been sharing with the public, and it pissed me off. They've been lying to us.
These were official documents.
Yeah, these are FOIA documents.
So you got really bit by this when you're seeing the dichotomy between these official documents from our government talking about UFOs and how they told you they were nonsense, and you're like, fuck this.
Yeah. So I had him on a third time. The response was big again. I thought, and in that third show, Lear hints about something that's out there in the Nevada desert. Reverse engineering of flying saucers, alien craft that are being taken apart to figure out how they work. And I thought that's a pretty outrageous claim, but in light of the things that he had told us before that turned out to be true, maybe we should look at it. And he hinted that he knew a guy who'd been hired to work at a place near Area 51. I didn't know who this guy was. 6 months go by. I'm anchoring the 5 o'clock news. And we have a 5-minute live interview segment every day on the news. It was, newsmakers, celebrities. Our guest of that day canceled at the last minute, maybe an hour and a half before the show. I called up Lear. I thought, hey, you told me about your UFO guy who's going to go to work out this base. Do you think he might talk to me? I had no idea who Bob Lazar was. I had no idea what had been going on in his life. But what had been happening had unfolded. It was a very dramatic personal odyssey for him. And he was afraid at the time he was going to be killed because he'd been out there and had seen this amazing technology. Would your guy come on the show? And boom, it was not 30 minutes later. Lazar, I didn't know his name at the time, was on his way to Lear's house. We set a live unit up there, set up an interview, and at 5 o'clock, we let it spill out into people's living rooms via television. And he told this amazing story. I had no idea what he was going to say, but he tells this story that there was a secret program, that he worked for the U.S. Navy, that the base was a place called S4, adjacent to Papoose Dry Lake, south of Area 51, or south of Groom Lake, rather, and that built into the side of the mountain were these hangars, and that inside the hangars were 9 flying saucers, flying discs, as if we had the variety pack, and that we were taking them apart to figure out how they work. This is alien technology. It's not American technology. And wow, just blew everyone away.
And I think you treated it, from seeing those historic interviews, because that is how I got interested in this subject was, we'll talk about that in a little bit, but just hearing you and Lazar and the broadcast. But what I noticed, and I still notice now, I look back, you treated it like news. You didn't like everybody else just say, oh, this is bullshit, I'm going to make some joke. You said, okay, thank you for being here. Thanks for reporting in. He was in silhouette. But the way you treated it made us think, wait a second, let's look at this guy. Now, you didn't believe Lazar right off the bat.
No. I thought it was outrageous. But I thought, Lear has led us down this road, and some of what he's told us has turned out to be true. And this guy, Lazar, whoever he was, sounded pretty credible. We asked him some pointed questions about his background and who he worked for and how it operated and how they were able to keep this a secret. And he had good answers. And it didn't seem like he was making it up. So we get off the set. The news director pulls me in. The general manager comes rolling in and go, "What the hell was that? Is that real? Is he telling the truth?" I said, "I have no idea, but I'm going to find out." Yeah, that weekend,
I can't get this audio correct.
I go up to Lear's house. We said, "I want to meet this guy," and we go to Lear's house, and there was some back and forth gamesmanship that was played, but eventually get to meet Lazar. We put him through his paces, ask him questions for 3-4 hours. And he had good answers about his background, about what he did out there, about the technology. Sodal and I leave that meeting looking at each other going, holy crap. I mean, what if this is real? This would be the biggest story in history. And it's right here in our backyard. We got to look into it. Sodal says, maybe we could do a multi-part series, like 5 minutes a night. That's only funny because we end up doing a 9-part series, 13, 14 minutes each, the longest stories I ever produced for television. And so I started, and I started. In the next 7.5, 8 months, I dug full-time into UFOs. And I thought to tell the story of Bob Lazar, I had to understand the bigger picture, the history of UFOs, separate wheat from chaff. Who's credible? Who isn't? What lies?
Blah, 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 blah.
What is the paper trail? That is really what hooked me, is the paper trail, the documents that we've just been talking about that indicate they know a lot more than what they've told us. So,
and you thought you were going to crack the story.
Yeah, I was cocky at the
UFO
time.
story. You're going to crack it.
I read everything about UFOs. I read everything I could get my hands on, and I realized this field is a mess. This topic is an absolute disaster because there's so many hucksters and fraudsters and people making stuff up, and you can't tell who's a ufologist from a pseudo-ufologist and who's real and who isn't. There's a lot of nonsense in there. Give me 6 months and I'll have this figured out. Well, it's 33 years later and I haven't figured it out yet, but I've at least figured out some of it. So from that day on, I dug into UFOs and have never stopped. And we produced a 9-part series in November of that year, and 1989. And it was the biggest, highest rated series that's ever been produced for local news in Las Vegas. Pirated copies went all over the world. I did a follow-up series 6 months later, had an even bigger reaction, or at least an equal reaction, and it was off the races from there. And luckily, at that time, just my luck, MUFON had its international symposium in Las Vegas that year. So right after I started working on Lazar and what became UFOs, the Best Evidence, the UFO world came to my door. There, I got to meet Stan Friedman and interview him. Walt Andrus, the head of MUFON. I got to meet Linda Howe, and subsequently met Bud Hopkins, Whitley Strieber, John Mack, all the luminaries, the really credible, hardworking people who knew this topic, and they shared so much with me over that. And there was no turning back after that. Then I'm the UFO guy.
Right, but you continued as a journalist breaking mob stories. I mean, UFOs might not have killed you yet, but mobsters sure have tried to. I mean, there's a lot that you went through all these years being a journalist, taking heat from people about the fact you're treating the UFO thing with journalistic integrity. That wasn't so cool 10, 15, 20, 25 years ago like it is today. It's okay to talk about it.
Yeah, it wasn't cool at all, in fact. And, it was cool with the public. The thing is, the public couldn't get enough of it. And no matter where I went, to this day, the public, if I'm in a grocery store, I'm in a bar, I'm in a restaurant, people come up and engage with me. They ask me, do you really believe that stuff? And what they really want to know is, they want to tell me their UFO story. And it seems like everyone's got one.
Yeah.
And so the public couldn't get enough. The pushback came from my journalistic brethren. They hated it. I got nothing but crap about it. The newspapers in town ran editorial cartoons. The columnists made fun of the people with UFO beanies, and look over there, there's E.T. and Elvis, and all kinds of columns that whacked me on a regular basis. The morning radio DJs would, when they'd run out of belch, barf, and fart jokes, would take off on me. They wrote songs about it. I started getting letters from all over the world, wacky, crazy letters from UFO people who told me they'd been abducted, about sexual things that aliens had done to them. I mean, a lot of it was really crazy, but I tried to always treat it like a news story. And I could never understand the animosity from my fellow journalists, because the people who were bashing me on a regular basis back then had never done any of the work. It was easier to sit there and type up some wisecracks, the same UFO jokes that I've been told a million times since then and before then. It was easier to do that than to do the work, to go sit out at Area 51 in the desert night after night, as I did hundreds of times, to try to see whatever was flying around in the sky, to dig into Lazar's background, to investigate the background of other people who had worked in the military, who had some recognition of UFOs and knowledge of secret programs. And that was hard stuff. That was real journalism. And that's how I always tried to approach it, as a real, legitimate story. Once you separate the wheat from the chaff and get down to the bottom of it, 95% of everything you hear in the field is probably explainable, but that other 5% is really interesting. And it could be, as we said at that first meeting with Lazar, could be the biggest story in history.
So, I mean, on this podcast, on this show, let's say limited series, 12 months, if we go all the way about a lot of the stories that you have brought to public attention, we don't have to go into all the depths of them right now, but I just want to highlight, as a journalist, I mean, you also are the only journalist that went over to Russia during Glasnost and Perestroika, saw that opportunity, and got original files, the classified files that you stripped of the classification and brought with you back to the U.S., talking about Russia's UFO program. So that's one of the things we'll go into on this. But you also
hello
at Skinwalker Ranch, which is this now real famous place, a paranormal hotspot, a place where there's UFO sightings and more. So those are some of the things in your career. You've written a couple books on the Skinwalker Ranch.
I've written 2 books, yeah. Hunt for the Skinwalker and Skinwalkers of the Pentagon. Written newspaper columns and produced programs and specials that were independent of KLAS as well, and work with you, of course. But, along the way, as with any good news story, the most important thing you can do is establish trust with sources. And it's not a trick. It's the trick in being trustworthy is to actually be trustworthy. So among the first people that I engaged when I first started down this road became people who are titans in this field and who are influencing events that are unfolding right now. One was Senator Harry Reid.
I might have
Reid
to
had
just go ahead and do it like
to the U.S.
this. I'm
Senate,
not
the
sure.
first of 5 terms in 1988. 1989, as I'm working on this Lazar Area 51 stuff, he had worked with the military and helped secure DOD budgets and things of that sort. I thought, who's going to want to know this is Harry Reid. So as I'm digging into it and getting more information, he's the first person I told outside of our newsroom. And it was in a limousine heading to McCarran Airport. He was flying back to Washington, and we had about a 25, 30-minute conversation. And instead of kicking me out and saying I'm crazy, he said, "That's really interesting. Keep me in a loop about this, and I'll help you." And he did. Over the next 30 years, we had a secret.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me, baby? Can you hear me? Can you hear me, baby? Check one, check two. Can you hear me? Can you hear me, baby? Check one, check two. Yodely lay, yodely lay. Yodely lay, yodely lay. Well, it is the out audio, not the input audio. It is the output audio. That is the issue that I am running into right now. This has got to be one of the funniest lives there's ever been. I know that for a fact. Now watch, as soon as I turn this bitch on, it's going to go click, 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 click.
Conversation behind the scenes. I wasn't going to report it. I didn't want to get him in any kind of political hot water or make him look crazy. But he helped me, and I helped him. I helped introduce him to a lot of people, and would send him information and documents, and he took a long time interested in it, and he ended up going to Area 51 a number of times. Among the other people I met at the same time was Robert Bigelow. Bigelow was a name that I did not know at the time, but he called me up the day the series on the air ended, I get a call. Hold for Robert Bigelow.
I watch as soon as I
He's a
turn this thing
billionaire.
on, it's going to go.
He had the budget suites. He had been a highly successful real estate developer. And he gets on the phone and says, "Hey, boy, that series is pretty good."
Dude, what in the world? How is it still
I
catching
appreciate the
that?
comment. Well, what do you mean? You help me? Well, financially support. You're going to do some additional research. I said, well, no, I work for Channel 8. I can't do that, but, keep you in mind. And they wanted to meet Lazar. I said, well, I'll ask Lazar, but he was pretty reticent to meet the public or engage with the public. He was scared.
Still is.
He thought he was going to be killed. He thought he was going to be killed at the time. So I said, I'll ask Lazar and I'll get back to you. And then within 2 weeks, Robert Bigelow, not one to be denied, had hired private investigators, tracked down Lazar, met him, and they were going to meet for drinks and invited me to join them. And then that started a little social circle of me and Bob and Gene Huff and Robert Bigelow, who would meet and talk about UFOs. And we took a trip up to Rachel and Area 51 and had some hijinks out there. And I got to know Bigelow really well. That relationship to not only my career, but also to the topic in general. And we'll get into how that works.
Yeah, we're going to definitely get into that. I mean, my theory is that a lot of these people that made a lot of headway in this field, for example, Senator Harry Reid, he's the one who created the funding for the largest acknowledged UFO program by our government ever. But from my understanding is he wasn't into this thing until you came at him about Bob Lazar. So we'll talk about that more later. But for people that don't, or just kind of hearing about who you are, that is your career in a nutshell, is that, you're a hard-edged investigative reporter. You broke stories that every kind of thing people can imagine, but the UFO thing has really stuck with you. It's branded you along the way.
And it changed. So in those days, the dominant paradigm was UFOs are ET craft coming here from other planets. They're visiting Earth from some other planet. That's the operating presumption that I had and what most of the UFO luminaries at the time thought. There was a guy named Dr. Jacques Vallée that I got to meet later in that second UFO project, who had maybe the most important writer on this topic, a key thinker, has written essential books about the subject matter, who is among the first to suggest UFOs may not be extraterrestrial. It might be something far more exotic. In fact, our first meeting, he said, I'm going to be really disappointed if it turns out the answer to this UFO mystery is that these are craft from other planets. Because he said, if, as the witnesses have indicated, and the evidence shows, these craft can manipulate space-time, create their own gravity. As Lazar has said,
right,
they can be from anywhere. They can be from ET, interdimensional, outer space, time travelers, all the above. So he got me thinking that maybe there's a lot more to it than just aliens visiting the planet. And then Bigelow drives that point home. He creates an organization called NIDS, the National Institute for Discovery Science. He had spent more money on UFO research than any person in the history of the world. And he offered $1 million up to the 3 major UFO organizations if they could just get along. You need money. You're always complaining about not enough money to do research or investigations. Here's $1 million. All you got to do is get along. Of course, they couldn't. And so he pulled it back off the table, created his own UFO organization based in Las Vegas called NIDS. I'm the only journalist that's allowed to know about it. He had me speak at the first meeting of this NIDS Science Advisory Board, this amazing panel of people. Jacques Vallée is there, along with Dr. Hal Puthoff, a CIA scientist who helped develop remote viewing, Dr. Edgar Mitchell,
sixth man to walk on the moon,
and a PhD astrophysicist,
and a
brilliant
great
guy.
Yeah.
John Alexander came later. Dr. Colin Kelleher came later. Just a table full of people. There was another U.S. senator who was at the table, Dr. Harrison Schmitt, who was on this board, who had been the last person to walk on the moon. And I delivered a presentation to them at their first meeting about the Russian files that you mentioned.
Okay.
And I was just blown away by it. I get out of that meeting, and about a week later, I called Senator Reid. I said, hey, there's this new organization on this topic that you and I talk about under the table now and then, and I think you'd really be interested. He says, do you think I could get invited? Well, that was my point of calling him. And I said, yeah, I'll set it in motion. And he did. He got a meeting, he came to a NIDS meeting later in that year, and then from there on, he was hooked. He saw the caliber of people who were around that table, and he was hooked.
Yeah, and to fast forward from that, so we'll go into that in other episodes, I'm sure. but NIDS became other things that ended up being this huge DIA government UFO program. So on this podcast, it's fair to say we're going to talk a lot about UFOs.
Yeah, I'll just say about Skinwalker. So that same year, NIDS Bigelow buys Skinwalker Ranch, and the ideas that Jacques Vallée had planted with me that it may not be extraterrestrial, that bore fruit there at the ranch, because the smorgasbord of strange stuff that was going on there certainly doesn't sound like what we think we know about ETs. This was something else, and we'll get into that.
Yeah, I mean, the more that you look into this topic, even for myself, the more unsure you are of the conclusions that you really started with. I mean, we all start with some idea of what we think it is, and the UFO mystery, it really, I mean, for me, it was this moment, this one moment that made me realize, I can't be a passive consumer of this. I have to be an active participant, because it's so fascinating.
Well, you and I have talked about it a lot of times over the last decade or so. They as I started out, the big questions: who are they?
I might have fixed it. I might not have. I don't really know.
What's their interest in us? And we don't have answers to any of that. We know
blah 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 blah.
No, and the more I learn, the fuzzier those answers get, because some of this activity, it doesn't fit into a category. And your own journey sort of started at the same place. We have the same gateway drug.
That's right. My gateway drug into UFOs was John Lear. I mean, well, really, I got to say my gateway drug into UFOs was you and Bob Lazar first coming forward to the public in the news reports, and Bob saying what he did about the propulsion systems of this UFO craft that he said he worked on. So we do have this central point. It was getting to you, though, that I think is hilarious. People should hear about that. But what happened to me was I heard you and Bob on the radio, and I heard Bob describing the way that the craft would move through space and time. And he described it as falling into place. Like he would always say, if you put a bowling ball on the bed and you stick your fist down and push down on the bed, the bowling ball falls into place. He's like, that's the way the craft moved. It's not reactionary propulsion. It's reactionless propulsion. It's not pushing something out the back to move forward, from rockets to roller skates. That's the way things move as far as we know. But hearing him as a 13-year-old kid, and you're interviewing him, hearing him talk about gravitational propulsion and falling into space, it dawned on me, even at that young age when I was interested in other things, this interests me because I could understand that if Bob Lazar was telling the truth, and if he was right about the propulsion, right, then distance no longer matters. It was this idea the universe is vast. There's probably intelligent life teeming through the universe, but they ain't coming here. There's no way. And the moment I heard Bob describe that, I realized distance would be irrelevant if the physics of what he's saying is correct. It wouldn't matter how far another civilization was. If they could build these machines, they could get here very easily. It's one thing a buddy of mine, a smart buddy of mine, once said to me, which is that, he goes, Jeremy, you're thinking about it wrong. He goes, it's It's probably really easy to get here. And, because I was like, why so much? Why so much activity of UFOs? It's not just one person, it's over time, so much contact, sightings, radar. It's got to be fucking easy to get here. So that was a really interesting way to look at it. So that was my inception point. I was 13 though. I had a whole life and whole career that I was starting in martial athletics
And art?
and art. I ended up doing art, because I got real ill and couldn't compete or train or anything like that. So I did art as well. And then, really I got this idea. I got a camera for my wedding, and it was really funny. I pointed it the second I'd pointed at somebody, they'd start spilling beans to me. It's like he would just talk and tell me stuff they probably shouldn't on camera, and I was like, well, this thing is magical. This thing, if I just pointed at somebody, it's magical. And I'm like, who can I point it at? I want to learn more about UFOs. So you were completely inaccessible. Of course, Bob was completely inaccessible. And I thought, well, who knows anything about this? And I thought that would be John Lear. So, finally I got through to John, which was also hard at the time because he was a little sick. So everybody was like ghosting me in the UFO world, and there was no like Twitter or anything that I could jump in and try to ask people questions. So finally Lear said, okay, you can come talk to me. And I think he just wanted me to smuggle him cigars and Fritos or something, because he didn't give me the time of day. We sit there, and for like 2 days, he's staring at me through the barrel of a cigar, not answering a single question. And I'm filming him just sitting at his computer. He was kind of testing me, I know, because I ended up filming with him for years after. But the first question I ever asked about UFOs was, okay, what is your best piece of evidence that UFOs are real? Show it to me. Show it to me. Put it in my hands. And, my gosh, how naive I was that it's that easy. But so that's why I started filming. But really, with journalism, it was me trying to get to you. And I think you probably know this story on your side, but you might not know it on my side. But man, I tried to contact you for, I think it was 2 years. It was some ridiculous time. If you look through your emails, you might find every 6 months, I was respectfully trying to reach out to you, called the station a couple times. Finally, somebody from your station called me back, and I was doing art, so I had paint all over my hands. I'm actually resining something at the time. And I just get the phone in my ear and goes, hold for George Knapp. That's all they said. And I'm like, what, hold on, hold on. And I'm like, and he goes, can I give you a piece of advice? And I said, sure. He goes, know what you want to say it clearly. He doesn't have much time. Hold for George Knapp. And I'm like, oh, fuck. So the second you get on the phone, I just start going, hi, my name is Jeremy Corbell. I'm really into this, but I'm not a crazy person. I really want to know the truth. And I've got a few things that I've been doing. I've been filming with John Lear for about 9 months, and I really want to know if you can give me any information. I'm really interested in this, and I want to know the truth, and I don't want any BS. And you seem like the guy. Just talked as fast as I could. And then it was like, I think you were eating a sandwich because it was like the longest pause. I thought you had hung up on me. And then you're like, okay, I'll do my part. I remember you said that. And then bam, probably the longest conversation we had on the phone, it was one way. You just told me shit. And I was like, man, that's so cool that you gave me that time, that you really did your part. So that just made my disease worse. I was like, oh man, I'm coming to stay with you. And you're like, okay. So that was how we, from my perspective, finally connected on the UFO topic. I think you saw I was serious about it. I was starting to film, I didn't even know I'd be a filmmaker, but I started to film because it was my passport into people's lives, was just holding this camera at them. Nothing's changed,
Well, Ian Russell is the guy you talked to. He's the producer for the I-Team. He was one of many shields that I had at the station. And after a while, I was all gung-ho in the beginning on the UFO topic. I wanted to hear from everybody, but it becomes oppressive after a while. You understand.
Yes, I do.
To this day, I stopped taking phone calls. I stopped answering the phone because I'd get on the phone and people would have a 2-hour story about their UFO experience, and you couldn't get anything done. So I reluctantly had to cut that off, and I have all kinds of people at the station who would run interference for me, which I regret, but there's no other way to get anything else done.
You can't survive. I mean, so since then, just so for people that don't know my work and what I've done, so what I've been attempting to do is gather as much information and get it out in a credible way, and films have been a cool way to do that, documentaries. So my first documentary was called Patient 17. I follow a guy named Dr. Roger Lear. He believed he was taking out what he called alien implants from people. It was really far out there. I didn't even want to do the film, but the guy, Patient 17, I found him very credible. So that was one of the reasons I made that first movie. And then obviously Hunt for the Skinwalker, which is based upon your initial research and book and filming out there. It was the first time anybody ever saw The Ranch. So that was a movie that came out on Hulu. So Patient 17 came out on Netflix. Huge success for an unknown filmmaker who didn't even go to film school and doesn't really know how to use aperture. Whatever. Then I made Hunt for the Skinwalker. And then finally I made the movie Bob Lazar, Area 51 and Flying Saucers, which also came out on Netflix. So as an unknown filmmaker, I've been very lucky to get, people to interview with me, but then just to get these films out and seen. Like, I feel like Inspector Crusoe.
How it was getting Bob to cooperate and to eventually go on camera.
Yeah, man. People don't get this. I mean, so it's like capturing the Yeti or the Sasquatch. Really lucky and patient, and it might not even exist.
Will it
obviously,
work?
knowing John Lear and then getting to know you, it's like there was this idea that at some point I could just talk with Bob. I didn't even want to necessarily film, I just want to talk with him. But it was radio silence. Notoriously, he doesn't feel a need to justify to the public what he's told them. He told the public what he did about UFOs and back engineering craft because he was scared for his life. And you know that better than anybody to be true because you were there during it. But getting Bob to go on camera took many, many years. I also didn't want to be pushy. And, I wasn't a real filmmaker really even then, even with anybody I was filming. So the thing with Bob, I lucked out one day. He came over to John Lear's house the first time I ever got him on camera. And respectfully, I put all the cameras away. And it's really nice to meet you. Hey, man, I really want to know, are you telling the truth? That's basically, are you fucking lying? And then you could just see this kind of look in his eye. And I said, Bob, look, I was 13 years old when you came out. 3 more minutes of you talking. The world hasn't had like extra footage of
Finally.
you. You
Oh
did some
my
news reports, but he would
God.
barely give his time. I'm like, just give me 3
This
minutes,
took
man.
a heck of
He
a
said,
lot
okay.
longer than I
And so I
expected.
filmed this, like, it was actually ended up being more than 3 minutes. It was the first time that he's really like defended his position. I was like, damn, that was cool. Even Lear said, I never heard him talk like
Well,
that. But
there we
that's not
go.
a movie, and that's not a real interview, and I'm a nobody with this stuff. So then you and I were talking all this time. Over time, one day Bob just calls me up. He goes,
I'm just
okay, come
glad that
over.
I got it to work
He's in
finally.
Michigan. I'm like, what do you mean come over? He's like, yeah, let's do it. Come on over. And I'm thinking, I still can't believe it. So I go with all of my bags of cameras, but I don't like let him see them. I'm just like, hey man, so why am I here? He goes, why do you think you're here? I'm like, are you gonna let me tell your story? He goes, under one condition. I said, what's that? And he's like, don't fucking lie. You know, just don't corrupt, just word for word, what I say is fine. And I thought, wow, okay, here's my only one condition. You give me access to everybody and anybody. If I see a box and it's closed and I want it open, you're gonna let me open it. And he goes, yeah, fine. He didn't care. Let me look through all your videotapes. Yeah, cool. Audio tapes, no problem. So that's once he opened up, then it was like, okay, the world needs to hear this story again. They can make their own decision whether it's true or not true. Was not the point of my documentary. It was not a breakdown of every argument for and against Bob Lazar. The idea of the documentary was to show people who Bob was so they could not dehumanize and dismiss him based upon these outrageous things they've said. Just get to know he's a guy, and then you start thinking about his story. Maybe another documentary we go into the nitty-gritty of pros and cons for, is Bob telling us the truth? The point of Bob is telling us the truth. I believe Bob's telling us the truth, and I actually have more.
I don't even think it really matters if you can hear the clicking. I'm just glad that I got the dang stuff fixed. The audio is fixed as good as I can get it for now. Alright, so I was watching a video earlier, and let's go to history. I don't remember. Okay. There it is.
Channel began reporting rapid seafloor rise and the buoy was taken out of commission by the Australian BOM. Clearly it is back and in the exact same place, but when you factor in the further movement of the last 36 hours, more than 100 more meters, which is barely visible here at the end of the chart, we have officially eclipsed the 1,200 meter mark, or just about 4,000 feet. This could be volcanic, could be related to the fault destabilization described in many of our previous videos. It looks like this part of the world is a significant place to watch.
One of the biggest alternative news stories of that time was that a few days after this video aired, the buoy disappeared, and to this day both it and its data are gone. Further complicating the story is that this region forms a geographically small triangle with the strongest magnetic point on Earth, the South Magnetic Pole, and with the Dragon's Triangle, Asia's version of the Bermuda Triangle, and indeed, that new pole position is near where those airplanes disappeared in recent years. Now, since one pole might reasonably be expected to emerge on the opposite side of Earth, we find that to be here, in South America or perhaps just offshore, forming a geographically small triangle with the weakest magnetic region on Earth, the South Atlantic Anomaly, and the Bermuda Triangle, where airplanes may have been known to encounter a difficulty or two over time. So the magnetic poles are on a collision course, at a point near the magnetic maximum point of Earth in the Dragon's Triangle, with the other side of the world, where the other pole would be, happening to sit next to the magnetic minimum point of Earth and the Bermuda Triangle. This is not your normal polar wander. This is a true shift, and Earth is already down approximately 20% in magnetic field strength and decreasing. As if all these coincidences aren't enough, there is one more, and it is the big one.
I decided that a magnetic reversal had an awful lot to do with the dinosaur extinction. And then the more I researched, I realized that magnetic reversals also, as far as I'm concerned, trigger ice ages, and that they return in the cycle in a regular pattern that we should actually be able to predict. When you have the onset of an ice age, of course, here's the conundrum. The conundrum is that you've got to have a very large, rapid accumulation of glacial ice, which requires that the climate be cold enough that ice does not disappear through seasonal melting. At the same time, you have to increase the amount of evaporation from the oceans in order to loft this much moisture into the air that can precipitate out as snow that ultimately is compressed into glacial ice. The problem is, as you can see, is that it requires heat. So there's the kinds of conundrums that we're confronted with when looking at this. See, our predecessors from a few generations ago had it a lot easier because they could imagine that the whole process took 100,000 years or longer. We don't have that luxury anymore.
A recent paper in the world's #1 geophysics journal highlights this disaster that looms on the geological horizon, but it's not something that happens hundreds of thousands of years apart.
We call them excursions, magnetic excursions, which is, a term that's well integrated in the literature now, and these are very short-lived reversals, but they're associated with minima in field intensity, and it's the minima in field intensity that are implicated because when you have low field strength, you enhance UVR.
How do you go from the heat and energetic input of the solar blast to an ice age? The answer will ultimately determine whether a solar aspect is a superflare or a micronova.
Sometimes admitting you don't know, at least your mind is open to look for more evidence. Right now, the pressing issue is, if I'm right that this next Gleisberg cycle is going to be when the reversal happens, I'm going to be like 99 years old. And some of you are probably not going to make it either in 27 years.
Hey now.
But it's for the children and grandchildren and the unborn generations.
Oddly, as vastly more energetic as a nova event would be than a solar flare, it may bring about more of the cooling effects to our planet. To explain the ice ages occurring with the magnetic reversals, we must actually look to either that nova-like event or the tilting of the Earth's crust, which vexed Einstein for a solution he never found beneath our feet. The sun does not bulge, in blatant disrespect of physics. It has a secret. Its cycles always build to greater crescendos, and the great solar blast could truly disrupt our entire planet. While Vogt does not advocate for a tilt of Earth, he does advocate for a reversal of rotation. The stories of the sun rising in the wrong place. The stories of the long night where tribes believed the sun might never rise again. The stories of the sun standing still in the sky. All of those ancient stories from around the world complement those found in the rock. Interestingly, either a 90-degree tilt and tilt back and forth, as was described by Chan Thomas, Albert Einstein, and Major White, or the rotation reversal advocated by Vogt, both leave evidence of the poles residing in the same positions over millions of years, cycle after cycle bouncing back to the same places, such that if you were to look over long periods of time, you might think the pole has never moved at all. Here, it is Einstein's hitting a brick wall that actually gives us our best chance to know what's happening. Like Chan Thomas and all who came before him, Einstein saw the tilting of the crust. His problem is that the most likely geophysical actor is Greenland. Its massive ice weight creates an uneven distribution of mass in the northern hemisphere, which due to centrifugal force of the planet's rotation, wants to spin at the equator. The problem of geophysics which Einstein realized and never overcame, is that Greenland is unlikely to ever gain quite enough ice mass to unlock the rocky crust from the liquid mantle and float freely. It is that unlocking of the crust that is so critical to the crustal tilt possibility. Einstein, Major White, the researchers throughout history, and Chan Thomas are all focusing on what's known as the low velocity zone, a thin barrier between the rocky crust and fluid mantle, but which acts like plastic due to a delicate thermoelectric equilibrium, meaning the temperature and electrical activity create the plasticity and the friction. If that equilibrium were to be disrupted, it would allow the crust to float freely on the mantle and allow for any number of tilt or plate collision scenarios to occur. Well, how do you disrupt the thermoelectric equilibrium that's creating the low velocity zone? A major solar blast. Such an eruption would immediately change viscosity in the magma due to cosmic ray bombardment, and also cause temperature changes, which would only add to the temperature changes resulting from any induced currents that resulted when the shockwave hit Earth's magnetic field. Those events are indeed globally induced, and they are electric. We may also scale up the two known drivers of length of day glitches. Believe it or not, those are real. They are usually small glitches, self-correcting or spread over long periods of time, and are either caused by major solar storms, geomagnetic jerks from Earth's core, or in the case of the longer-term variations, Earth's long-term magnetic field changes. Now, since the length of day means we are talking about rotation speed and crustal motion atop the mantle, it bears mentioning that in the greatest solar storm imaginable, which could induce current all the way to Earth's core if we know modern-day blasts can affect the mantle, makes for possibly combining the two causes of rotation speed glitches in the same energetic solar mechanism that would satisfy the ancient stories, disrupt the low-velocity zone, and unlock the crust. We are now at the second time we have found ourselves confronting way too many coincidences to ignore.
It's a little bit difficult to go back and to say, well, the story is not exactly so. We have the phenomena from all places, from the bottom of the sea with ash and with nickel, which is of meteoric origin. The terrestrial axis moves. That paleomagnetism proves us that terrestrial axis, that magnetic axis, possibly like Runcan and other of Manchester, claim that the Earth turned over. We know now from observation of Professor Danjon, director of Paris Observatory, that flares on the sun may influence the speed of rotation of the Earth, and there were sudden changes. We generally don't like to know that we are traveling on a
I know the playback is annoying. I'm just trying to figure something out.
What were all these ancient people saying? What were all these people trying to remember? We must take the words left to us in generations of oral histories and written records of observations in the sky as instances of events that were not the norm. They were so important and unusual that they have come through time as warnings left by our brothers and sisters of the ancient past. These events were not lunar eclipses or earthquakes. Now in this time, with our understanding of celestial mechanics, atmospheric and geological sciences, we must try to make sense of these recorded events and untangle them from worship and prophecy. It's time to look at them for what they actually provide as a roadmap of things to come. We can ask the question, has the Earth stopped rotating for any length of time in recorded history? And the voices call out to us from the ancient Middle East. The book of Joshua in 1405 BC. O sun, stand still over Gibeon. O moon, over the valley of Aijalon. 1013. The sun stood still, and the moon stood motionless while the nation took vengeance on its enemies. The event is recorded in the scroll of the Upright One. The sun stood motionless in the middle of the sky. It did not set for a full day. And those same voices call out to us from ancient Peru. Also in 1405 BC, the 40th Inca Capac was Pachacuti, the reformer that started the worship of the sun god Inti. In 1405, there occurred a frightening darkness. Quote, good customs were forgotten, and people were given to all manner of vice. There was no dawn for 20 hours. After a great outcry, confessions of sins and sacrifices and prayers, the sun finally rose. Has the world experienced a global cataclysm before? And will it happen again? And what was remembered, and how is it described to begin again? The voices call out from the ancient American Indians, and this is the ninth and last sign. You will hear a dwelling place in the heavens above the earth that shall fall in a great crash. It will appear as a blue star. Very soon after this, the ceremonies of my people will cease. Has this cataclysm happened before? The voices call out from ancient China. There were seen fire-breathing dragons leaping into the sky. They call out from ancient Siberia. The earth was on fire from both horizons. And they call again from the ancient past in the voices of the Inca. At the Intihuatana was a stone cut with great precision to observe and measure the movements of the sun. The name meant that which binds the sun, and it makes it return, lest it disappear, returning the earth into a darkness that had occurred once before, according to the legends. Did the Inca, Chinese, Siberians, and the rest remember the last micronova event in their oral histories? We need to take these people seriously.
Now let's take a moment for the respect of geophysics and things like basic inertia of the Earth's rotation being unimaginably unstoppable. That indeed is the current prison from which Earth's catastrophe cycle must escape. The tilting of Earth's crust is restrained by the evidence that the poles and the ice existing at the polar regions have done so for millions of years, and both the tilting crust and Vogt's rotation reversal are battling the force of inertia of our rotation. The reason that the poles and ice matter is because the entire topic of catastrophe was umbrellaed under Charles Hapgood's absurd version, where 7-degree tilts happen randomly and over 1,000 years and never tilted back to put the poles in their original positions. This concept was easily debunked, and there went the field of study. However, the previous versions to Hapgood's, Vogt's rotation change, Major White's insider version, and the Chan-Thomas classified version all put the poles in the same places over millions of years. Furthermore, the most highly cited work on past pole positions, which was used to debunk Hapgood's work, and which was used to crush the field of catastrophes as a whole, actually has a correction paper published, which was cited far, far less often, and which nobody really remembers. But it changed the past pole positions from the original publication, in some cases to the point where the original paper had them on the opposite side of the planet, as wrong as you can be with a polar search. Another of the well-cited papers debunking the polar motion came from a bachelor's student at Columbia, while in theory, a major paper does not require a major degree. This student worked under the CIA-controlled programs at Columbia, at the time when it was becoming so rampant and overbearing that the local community had begun an uproar. This is how you control a scientific theory. Whether we further investigate the problem of the poles in the past or we cling to the concepts that don't require them. The only reason this topic is considered pseudoscience is because a wildly mutated version of the story was put out by a CIA agent masquerading as a professor, and which somehow overthrew the centuries of study and literally the world of evidence.
One of the things that you and I have been talking about are the idea of these micronova events on the sun, these periodic cyclical eruptions on many stars based on the Kepler-2 satellite data. And that as this stuff is sprayed out into the universe around in our solar system, and these things could have been blasted out from the sun in these periodic explosions, and that could have been deposited on the moon, on Earth, on Mars. The fact that they're only about 12 miles down indicates they're not deep penetrator meteor impacts. So it leads me now to believe that these magnetic anomalies, if not all of them, certainly some of them, could be from solar eruptions. And this is just solar material that is splattered out and these planets have run into in this huge cloud of debris once the sun releases these nova events.
End of the last ice age, we had catastrophic rains, catastrophic flooding. I believe this goes along with the solar outburst at the time, which caused glacial melting virtually instantaneously in the ice core, records and in the sediment records, but particularly the ice core record, we see that we snapped out the end of the last ice age virtually overnight. I mean, literally the microstratigraphy is that accurate. And what happens to, what could be the cause of coming out of the ice age so quickly? We're talking an incredible temperature increase. And based on many lines of evidence I've now been accumulating, I'm convinced this was a major solar outburst, a major solar event. I'm now convinced that we have direct evidence on the Giza Plateau of a, quote, lightning strike, unquote, which would not be a lightning strike in the sense of normal thunderstorms, that type of thing. But I'm convinced that it probably is indicative of what was happening at the end of the last ice age, and that the Giza Plateau itself was literally hit during the solar outburst. But I now am convinced that we have on the plateau direct evidence of this, as we have elsewhere on Earth. And it turns out on the plateau was found something known as the inventory stela. And this is something I've been studying in great detail with my colleague, Dr. Manu Safzadeh, and it talks about Khufu, the supposed builder of the Great Pyramid, acknowledging that the Sphinx was already there and that the Sphinx had been struck by, quote, lightning in much more ancient times.
The lightning strike that he speaks of is between the second pyramid and the Sphinx. So the pyramid with the capstone, if you will, there that's still intact, and between that and the Sphinx, the back end of the Sphinx. So it's vitrification everywhere and a big scar going deep into the ground.
We have major vitrification because of this, quote, lightning strike. And again, I would stress it's well beyond anything that you would get with normal atmospheric, thunderstorms. But vitrification there, I'm convinced, as we're finding elsewhere, that ties in with these the phenomena, and I'll use the term cataclysm at the end of the last ice age. When you have vitrification at this level on something like the Giza Plateau, it cannot be a meteorite or a comet or an asteroid, because that would have literally destroyed
the monument.
On the monument. You wouldn't have the monuments left. On the inventory stela, it talks about this huge lightning bolt knocking off part of the back, basically, of the Sphinx.
There is a concern for the lower-level L-shell magnetic fields, the smaller arches instead of the global fields connecting to the polar regions. In most solar blasts, even the worst ones we only see every decade or so now, the magnetosphere of Earth compresses down to those outer L-shells, but still connects to the polar region in the most exposed outer zones. But in the extreme scenario, it could be very different. The modeling of the Great Solar Storm of 1859, for example, which lit telegraph wires on fire and shocked operators, came close to hitting the lowest level L shells. And if that were to actually happen on Earth in a superflare or micronova, then you get the potential for a magnetar-type discharge, where its own processes are thought to surge energy through its L-shell fields, arc down, and literally crack the surface of the star. At that point, the loss of power grids might be one of the lesser concerns. As for the electric geology, lab results confirm this action on terrestrial planets. The only question is, did it happen before, and could it happen again?
You have to bring in new evidence, and it has to adjust your theory, because theories are just theories. Now, one of the interesting things about the Clementine mission is it took magnetic readings of the entire surface of the moon and found the largest magnetic anomalies on the far side of the moon, around von Karman and Leibniz craters on the far side, which is exactly where the Chinese just landed a lander.
Does China know? Does the U.S. government know? All the information shared here is published in major journals, with admittedly a bit of connect the dots as well, trying to fill in the gaps of the researchers throughout history with the tools they didn't have. Certainly it seems like the CIA had it pegged decades ago, at least the fact that there was a cyclical catastrophe, and perhaps as early as Major White's Project Nanook expedition to the North Pole. It all relates to the all-important question of survival in the catastrophe, and the only good news we have to deliver in this presentation. There is evidence of tremendous retreat of the populace into caves and tunnels thousands of years ago. Multiple times, actually. These tunnels have been reused countless times over history, including during wartime and by smugglers, but their purpose was once to house the humans who, for some reason, could not remain at the surface. As terrible as this event is, we must remember that we are here today.
They're talking about this stuff right now. This was on a video like a day ago. I can probably go find it.
Hey, so we have survived countless catastrophes and come out on top of this world. We are survivors. Our government appears to believe it has what it takes for the country to survive. What may have begun as underground shelter for the military elites, and which may have expanded as the result of threat of nuclear war in the mid-20th century. What exists now is a complex, interconnected underground world, far greater in capacity than could ever be needed by the military. One must genuinely begin to ask how many people could fit down there. There are many maps on the internet and lists of deep bunkers and bases, but these are just the ones we know about. Most on these maps are even acknowledged publicly. There's no telling just how much more exists and how ready the country really is.
The U.S. government knows some of this stuff. They know the sun does nova. There's no debate about that. The question is they don't want you guys to know about it. If it's no longer secret, there's no point in keeping it a secret. They're desperately looking for any other explanation. Don't look at the sun. That's it.
The rebirth of catastrophism has unquestionably begun. For those watching our daily program, it may already be obvious how much more rapidly the papers on the topics relevant to Earth's catastrophe cycle are coming out, and how much more attention they're receiving in the larger media. We are 6 months past the release of our book on this topic, The Next End of the World, The Rebirth of Catastrophism. And the last 6 months have been an even more incredible flurry. The topics we cover in the book are now being flushed out and expanded and reanalyzed at a rate that is staggering. Utterly staggering. Here, 6 months after our book proclaiming the field had been reborn, let me show you just what's happened since then. From the ancient stories to the astrophysics to the paleogeologic studies and the lab work showing how worlds are worked by these electric events. Here we go.
I'm not even gonna mess
Would have been
with
really nice if these guys had just hurried about a month or two so I could get this in there alongside Billy's lab experiments. One of the most voluminous aspects of the field's rebirth is in new corings and sediments and similar analyses showing these events within both the 12,000-year cycle and the 6,000-year magnetic half-cycle. We are seeing their confirmation at various places across the globe, and their varying intensity across the globe, suggesting it's never a global unsurvivable disaster, but a harsh transition nonetheless.
By the way, I'm watching this video because of Ralph William. He goes by both. That is the reason that I'm watching this.
We are learning more about how our species was challenged but endured each of these past events, and we've seen modern technology extend these studies into deeper analyses of our ongoing situation and the secular variation of the field in general. Few people know of the new observation sites planned to monitor the field event, including one by the Indonesian government that is exactly where the magnetic pole shift has them set to meet. Yet another nod to what modern observations and the last generation of catastrophists claimed as well. The most critical studies in this line of the field came with the identification of another anomalous event in the field progress back in 2015, which explains most of our scary geomagnetism videos from that year, and a confirmation of the 2017 acceleration of the field centered on the Pacific sector above that LLSVP. Remember that last bit about the field changes tied to the regions above the large internal Earth structures for later in this video. A quick stop at Greenland, where 2 bombshells dropped in about a week. The first suggesting that Greenland melted off entirely in the recent geologic past, and then the second describing warm periods at half the age of the alleged oldest Greenland ice. The datings of corings must be re-envisioned entirely. Folks, that's the retrospective look at the magnetic cycle and Earth changes during past events. Now, let's head out to space. In the realm of nova, We continue to see the standard view challenged with anomalies and extended outburst ranges, and the nova we've been missing are starting to show up with the latest technology and in ways they never thought to look before. Dr. Sofu's first paper made the book. The follow-up discoveries were just a few weeks too late. We continue to see the micro and even nano nova limit pushed, with one at X-ray luminosity around only a strong M-class solar flare from the sun. Nobody is claiming a 10 to the 34 erg burst from our star is impossible anymore. We continue to see shockers like planets surviving supernova, let alone the smaller nova events, and we continue to be reminded of the broad array of names given to the recurring stellar outbursts. Just a reminder, this is just in the last 6 months since the book came out, because you'd be forgiven for forgetting. We're at the whales next, where we've got confirmation of their dependence on Earth's magnetic field, and that happened about the time we were learning of their distress being at record levels amidst the ongoing magnetic excursion here at Earth. We saw more on the conductivity of the deep Earth and how it should be part of the entire conductive system of the globe, part of the electromagnetic mechanism for glitching the Earth's rotation, changing the length of a day, with solar storms getting a nice nod confirming their role in the matter, especially in its interaction with the geomagnetic field. And as that field changes, so changes our speed, apparently. The fastest 28 days on record were in 2020, and we're speeding up even more in 2021. Would have been really nice to have that in the book, along with the asthenosphere drag of the crust, which they thought was impossible until apparently just after the book came out. We see the difficult science of galactic mapping continue with identification of the magnetic structures of the galaxy, with a look to the side, so to speak, revealing the curve of the wave, showing we're in the southern positive sector, heading into the northern negative sector. We've seen them trace these ripples to the circumnuclear region, even way inside the galaxy, and as they confirm that the Parker spiral in the solar system extends way, way out to the outer reach, as the lab work and plasma physics demand, we know the same must be true for the outer reach of the galaxy as well. And we have seen a number of excellent studies on the sun's current sheet effect on Earth that can be used to understand how the sun will react so violently to the passage of the galactic sheet. Remember this one from a few months ago? A strange radio signal is expected from a star recently having undergone its ignition of disaster by the galactic sheet, as was the case with the Proxima Centauri superflare a few years ago. We expected to continue to hear about changes on the planets, and the Pluto atmospheric collapse was the last one to make the book. Neptune's storm reversal news broke a few weeks later.
I'll have to come back to this. Nathaniel Gillis. Nathaniel Gillis is making his presence known.
It says it is from other research. The intersection of NHI encounters and mystical symbols or sigils forms a unique cultural tapestry where UFOs are not just unexplained flying objects, but are perceived as sacred or occult symbols or sigils invoking communication with otherworldly realms. The term sigil generally refers to symbols considered to have magical powers. Yes, we know that. In the context of UFOs, though, enthusiasts and researchers have begun to explore how these aerial phenomena might represent or communicate unknown energies and potential messages. This idea of presenting in various works linking the areas of UFOs to ritualistic and spiritual events. And such practices are becoming more widely used. There, you have it, And I think some of the younger generation are getting into it, be honest with you. I think they're steered. I think they're even manipulated in a certain sense to have an interest in it. And I don't think it's good. Jacques Vallée stated, because he had a new book out recently, I think it's his 7th journal or something like that. But he has stated UFOs are essentially a response from the unknown, with symbols and sigils that inhabit our consciousness as both a challenge and an enigma. But he's recognizing it.
Yep.
That is interesting. Occult practitioners, some practitioners see UFOs as modern day archetypes or sigils emerging from collective consciousness. These sightings challenge logical perceptions, serving as a conduit for expanded introspective and spiritual transformation. Even if you look at synchronicity, just as Carl Jung did, he explored the concepts of synchronicity. UFOs can serve as synchronistic
What the hell was the point of showing that guy talk?
synchronistic beacons that defy logical explanation and require interpreting the symbols enfolded within their experiences, as Jung described. It is an intersecting moment of meaning between inner and outer experience. That's how he put it, defining the two as two different realities. Then he mentioned about magical thinking. Aligning UFOs with sigils introduces the idea that witnessing an unexplained aerial phenomena might be unintentional invocation. A magical call to comprehend the realm that humans do not yet understand. Interesting, and you put that into the idea of the concept of why am I seeing so many UFOs, sort of thing, you know? Even Tucker Carlson. Now, Tucker Carlson, I like Tucker Carlson. You know, he's quirky, makes me laugh. I think he's got ADHD, to be honest with you. You know, because he just explodes. But he's a quirky guy. I like his path of research because he got into this all excited. Oh, I'm really interested in UFOs. I want to know the answers. And as he got as he got into it, he started slowing down. He started realizing, I don't know if I like this where it's going. This. But I'm going to have to go anyway. And it took him to a place where he now says, I don't need to do any more on UFOs.
Yeah.
You know, I'm done. I don't need any more. I know what it is. But he won't say what it is. He gets better what people give it. Well, tell us then what it is. And he'll kind of stick because he's being tactful. But what is interesting, that path he took was quite significant. The research, the length of time he was involved in that. And after conducting years of heavy research into the UFO phenomenon, as well as the occult connections which led in that direction, he claims he'd been physically attacked. He claims he's waking up, not being able to breathe, his throat is restricted, he's panicking. Eventually, he does manage to, he does ease off a few minutes later, tries to go back to sleep, but then suddenly he feels pain, severe pain, both sides of him. He's got marks, scratch marks, deep scratch marks. There's blood. His wife's looking at the blood on the bed. What else can that be? He's describing this and he's saying, what the hell is that? What is that? Why did this happen to him? And he's thinking, okay, there's something that's happened here that is not very nice, but maybe it's because of my involvement. I've decided to take my foot off the pedal now, you know. Maybe it's something to do with that. But he's openly said this, and his wife has openly said that about having the experience.
I wake up at 2:30 in the morning. I check and I couldn't breathe at all. My throat was closed. It wasn't like I was apnea or was strong as I couldn't breathe. So I get up, I stand in the doorway of our bedroom, and I'm like, wow, I'm dying. I could feel myself starting to gray out. And then I started walking in the backyard, and then it slowly came back. Like my throat kind of opened up a little bit. I was like really weirded out. I walk back in, and my wife wakes up. She goes, what is going on? I said, I don't know. I can't breathe. I feel better now. And all of a sudden, I had this horrible pain underneath my arms, like on the side of my chest, like bad. I thought I'd been like ripped with a knife or something. It just was very intense. So I go into the bathroom, I flip on the light, and I have claw marks on both sides, on right and left side on my ribs, and they're bleeding. And they're literally claw marks, 4 on either side. I put my fingers in them, don't fit my fingers, and I sleep on my side. So how could? And by the way, no one woke up, So I show my wife, and she's like, "Oh my gosh." And then I have this like crazy intense desire to read the Bible. So I read the Bible and I pass out in like 2 minutes, and I wake up, and the next morning I thought, man, did I have a wild dream? And then I see blood in my sheets, and I go in the bathroom and I have these bloody marks.
So yeah, I can understand why he wants to sing that from the rooftops. I mean, remember talking to you when I did an investigation in Leicester? There was a guy that's living at a house with this woman, and his wife, him and his partner, and his friend did something very stupid one night walking through a graveyard. And I'm not going to say it out, but you can probably imagine it. But whatever it was brought back home. And
I'm confused on why Gillis is here because he hasn't talked.
some messed about with a Ouija board and some invocation using some ashes or this, that, and the other. But, well, yeah, maybe it's not a good idea to do that, because whatever descended upon that house and him was cruel, angry, vicious. He was attacking him. And the photographs of bruises appearing on him from being throttled at night, to the point where it got quite serious, and he was attacking him regularly. His partner went out one day, came home to find him on the floor, pretty much unconscious. He had markings on him of a hand. No, sure, I've shared with that with you. It's a hand with looks to be talons, claws, but it's the position of the hand. It's from inside out. It's from inside. So what you're seeing on the image is the top of the hand.
Yeah, with the
Not
so he would have
if you got slapped, you get slapped with the bottom of the hand.
Yeah.
What you're seeing is the top of the hand. Now, that's not good. And of course, he got rushed to hospital, nearly lost his life, had a heart attack, and his organs were shutting down. He never recovered properly. Never recovered properly from that. So some people might say, yeah, these things can take a pound of flesh. You know, it's a terminology, but you know what? It's a sequence of events that took place, which is an undesirable type of stuff that happened. But the photographs don't say it enough, to be honest, because when I was there and doing the investigation, several times I visited there, it was crazy, that environment. There were just conversations coming out the air, left, right, and center. You know,
that sign. That's one of the worst signs I've seen.
yeah, there were things around the house which were bursting into flames. You know, a dog bed, a mantle shelf above the fireplace, picture frames, sides of chairs and tables just bursting into flames, and this going on in the bloody background in the air. I mean, to be honest,
crazy.
It's a bit of a different type of paranormal investigation you have to do in these matters. It's not a walk in the park. But we set up equipment in the back bedroom on CCTV camera. That equipment got thrown around. It was full video, filmed. And it was just not good. But, you know, when you talk about things, because I've done it in another investigation, which was in Audenshaw, Manchester. A young girl was having problems in her home. And I'm mentioning this because on her bed, a handprint appeared. But it's the other way around. It's the top of the hand is on the bed.
That is so strange. I have not heard that before. Or if I have, I forgot. So, but yeah, the top of the hand. Interesting.
It's not like that. Passed down. It is literally come up from her bed.
That's a key point, Steve. Not to interrupt you, brother.
Yeah, no,
All
tell me.
Those watching this and want to suggest that these people are sleeping on their hands. No, they're not sleep. No. Number one. Number two, if that was the case, I should say, then we wouldn't see the same handprint there for hours in hours.
It lasted for weeks. This was a dermological mark. This is not an impression mark.
There we go. And people need to know that. So go ahead.
No, you're absolutely right, buddy. I mean, of course, we look into these things and we think, yeah, you know what, people can go to sleep. They might have had too many beers, fall asleep with the hand underneath them. You might get a pressure mark there, but it'll soon disappear within hours. You know, at least most it'll be in hours. It was well, it lasts for weeks. It didn't deter. It's the same as the bruises and the scratches. You know, a normal bruise, I've bruised myself when I've been lifting and moving stuff around or whack my arm or whatever. You end up with a bit of a bruise. A few days or so, and it's seemingly gone. At most a week. But some of these, you know, these bruises and things are lasting for weeks and weeks. The scratch marks that last for weeks and weeks. It's beyond the normal. They're not healing like wounds. You know, it's as if like the skin has been manipulated as opposed to a wound in a sense. And you've talked about this before, haven't you?
I'm gonna have to come back.
Now
to
the
this
skin is
tomorrow.
acting
I'm
differently.
tired.
Yeah.